Good afternoon and welcome to the Bright Blue event organised in partnership with Smart Energy entitled Smarter, Greener, Our Low Carbon Energy Future. My name is Rebecca Foster. I'm a researcher at Bright Blue. For those of you that may not know, Bright Blue is an independent think tank and pressure group for liberal conservatism, and one of our major focuses are energy and the environment policy. So if you wish to tweet about this event, please use the handle @WeAreBrightBlue and #BrightBlue. We're also streaming this live session, and for those of you who are watching online, please do submit questions using our Slido link. Our important discussion today will look at how the uptake of renewable energy in the UK will mean that our electricity grid must become smarter. In this event, we will explore just how significant the role of smart energy systems will be in our UK's energy future, the barriers to adoption of smart technology and its benefits, and the lessons we can learn from other countries. We will also be discussing the future energy mix for the UK, the economic opportunities associated with the renewable sector, and how the costs of the energy transition must be justly met. Here today to answer and discuss these questions, we have our excellent panellists, who I'll very shortly introduce, who will each give a 5-minute speech on the adoption of smart technology for the transition to a low-carbon economy. So, afterwards, we are going to have a discussion, and I'll open up to questions from the audience and from our online audience. So, here today, we are joined by Andy Manning, who is Principal Economic Regulation Specialist, Citizens Advice, at my far right. We are also joined today by Professor James Yu, MBE, on my right in the middle, Head of Innovation, SP Energy Networks. I'm joined by Murdo Fraser, MSP, Shadow Cabinet Secretary for COVID Recovery, Scottish Conservatives. Alex Sobel, MP for Leeds North West and Chair of Net Zero APPG. Terry Letonen is the State Secretary at the Ministry for Environment and Government, Finland. Dan Brooke, Chief Executive of Smart Energy, GB. So, the questions we'll be going through today include: how can countries accelerate their transition to a low-carbon electricity grid? How can the cost of decarbonising energy be justly met? What does the future of energy supply look like? What are the economic opportunities that are associated with the renewable sector? What are the key barriers for creating smart energy systems? What role will smart technologies and the smart grid play in resolving the intermittency and issues associated with renewable energy? And what are the benefits of smart technologies for consumers and businesses? So, if we could start with having our introductory remarks. Alex, go with you, please.
Thank you. At COP, we just run round talking at events, so these are not well-researched and fact-based ideas. These are really just things that I think and have picked up through having conversations with people in the energy sector and through the debates we've had in Parliament. So really, we're coming to a crunch with the energy system. We're going to need much more capacity in our electricity system and much more flexibility. We need to think of the electricity system as a two-way energy system. So an example of this is, for instance, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles spend most of the time not in motion, not driving, but parked. So an electric car that's parked outside your house, that's plugged into the charger. If we have a smart two-way and flexible electricity system, that vehicle can be used at peak times to put electricity into the grid, and off-peak times to recharge its battery. And there are cars now available on the market that can be programmed like that, but our system isn't yet flexible enough to do it. And just thinking about the growth in these cars, so I think there is a misconception about what's happening in the UK car market. So the best-selling car for the last few months in the UK is the Tesla Model 3. You know, it is outselling every ICE car, and that is just going to grow. as we see, as the ZEV mandate comes in, the zero emission vehicle mandate comes in, and other measures come in the growth in electric vehicle infrastructure. And so our grid infrastructure needs to keep pace with that and think about that, because actually the storage needs in the system are going to become capacity, because you've got to think about battery technology is going to improve. However, there's going to be a huge demand globally for batteries, for both vehicles, for storage, for industrial use, and batteries need rare earth metals, quite often from conflict zones. So we're going to have to be efficient in the use of these batteries. So batteries that play more than one role, so a battery in a car used for mobility, but also that same battery is also used as storage for the energy system, the electricity system, is really useful. I'm just going to talk, and I'm sure that others will, maybe Andy will mention the issue of fuel poverty. So when I was a councillor previously to being a Member of Parliament, we installed 1,000 solar panels on the roofs of council houses in Leeds. The council was able to do that because the excess electricity generated would be repaid through the feed-in tariff mechanism, and that was a repayment to the council. As the feed-in tariff gradually was eroded and has now sort of ceased to exist, that programme can't be continued. But that sort of initiative, particularly for people in social housing, would, one, obviously increase renewable capacity, but two, would take people out of fuel poverty because they wouldn't be paying for their electricity generation. We also need to expand the range of renewables we have and think about, we're going to have a lot of excess wind power, particularly at off-peak times, and how do we store it? So as well as battery technology, we need to think about the use of green hydrogen and electrolysis as a storage mechanism. And finally, we need tax incentives to really be able to make that transition going forward. And those tax incentives don't exist in the way that they should in our system, and there appears to be no movement in that direction. The net zero strategy the government came out recently didn't give an indication that those signals that come from the tax system were going to come forward.
Thank you very much. I would just like to pick on the last thing you mentioned there about a tax incentive. So why do you think the government hasn't picked up on focusing on that to try and bring us all together?
I'm not entirely, not being from the governing party, I'm not entirely sure, but I think the government think that the market itself will provide the solutions without the government needing to bring in tax incentives. What it does exist is contracts for difference, but that is, for big industrial initiatives, and is actually, that needs expansion. The government have indicated they might expand contracts for difference into new areas, but in terms of the sort of more, sort of for the smaller scale, that doesn't exist. And I think for local energy systems, that's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, great, thank you very much. And I'll next go to Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to Bright Blue for the invitation. And it's good to see this focus on issues around low carbon technologies when COP's going on along the road. I was very taken with what Alex had to say, and I don't disagree with a lot of the points he made. I just want to focus on the broad question of energy supply. And people involved in energy supply policy recognise what's called the trilemma, trying to balance the three competing interests of affordability, security of supply, and decarbonisation. And clearly, in the context of COP, decarbonisation has very much been pushed up to the top of the agenda. I think there's two key points I'll make initially, and then I'll look forward to the discussion. The first is that we need to approach this as a transition. We are still heavily reliant upon fossil fuels, particularly for heating, which is a major source of climate emissions. We are moving probably more rapidly than any other developed country towards a renewable future, but that's not going to happen overnight. And I would take issue with those who would protest in our streets, as we saw at the weekend, demanding we cease all investment in oil and gas now, because we will need fossil fuels as a transitional fuel for years to come. Just to give an example, the Scottish Government published just 3 weeks ago a target to replace all domestic gas boilers by 2030. Now, that's a very ambitious plan. The estimated cost of doing that at today's prices is £33 billion. So there's no indication yet who's going to pay that bill. And even if that money was available today, we simply don't have the people, we don't have the skilled tradespeople to replace every gas boiler in Scotland with a renewable heat pump. So there's nothing wrong with setting ambitious targets, but even if we met that target, that's going to be another 8 years for which we will still need a gas supply, most of which currently we are importing from Russia and elsewhere. So I don't think we should shut the door on fossil fuels quite yet, but move towards a just transition. And the second point I'd make about low carbon energy is I think we need to have a mix of technologies. We've done well in the UK in developing wind power, both onshore and increasingly offshore. We have a role for solar. We have a role for hydro. We are seeing pump storage that has been developed and perhaps more to come. I think there's a role for nuclear power, and I was really encouraged some of the announcements we've seen just this week on nuclear. I saw Ed Miliband being interviewed at COP saying Labour sees a role for nuclear power. I think that's important too, because we need to have a mix of technologies. We can't just rely on one or two. If we're going to meet what are very ambitious targets to phase out fossil fuels, we will only do that by having as many different tools in the bag as we can. So I hope that's a helpful introduction, Rebecca.
Yeah, very helpful, thank you. I just want to pick up on about the point you made about how we were experiencing gas shortages here in the UK, and we had this reliance on Russia to support us. And you did mention that you don't think we should move fully away from fossil fuels, but do you think that, Scotland in particular, we've got lots of potential for renewable energy, we could become sufficient in renewable energy at all? Is that something you just don't physically believe in? Or because then we wouldn't have to rely on these outsourcing of energy. So.
I think this is simply a question of timescale. All of us want to see us ending our reliance on fossil fuels. I just don't think we can realistically do that within the next 2 or 3 years, as some people would like us to do. So it's all about a phased and just transition, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and moving towards more renewable energy. That, of course, is going to mean generating much more electricity than we currently do. And we need to consider where that's going to come from. And we saw quite an interesting episode just a couple of weeks ago where, although we have very large wind capacity across the UK, wind generation dropped quite substantially because of the climatic conditions. And we need to be aware, we need to have a balance of technologies. So if, for example, the weather is cold, but the wind's not blowing, somehow we're able to replace that deficit.
And I think that's where smart energy comes in, where it needs to be managed. I'm next going to go to Terry Letonen, please, for your introductory remarks, because you've set the target to be net zero by 2030, which is very ambitious, and you're doing really well in doing that so far with the rollout of renewable energy. So I'm really interested to hear your introductory remarks, please.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for the previous speakers. I, in particular, much agreed with what Alex said. Indeed, we have a target to be climate neutral by 2035, so not quite 2030, but I'm glad to report that at least half of the Finnish population lives in cities and municipalities that have climate neutrality targets, which are before 2030. So you're half right with the 2030, and we're working very hard on this target. So moving away from fossil fuels is a clear must. That's a first. And there for the energy system, that's for heating and for electricity. Our electricity grid and production is already quite, I think it's 85% fossil or emission free. But the electrification is also going to be the key solution for many other sectors. So also for heat, we have for home heating, we have a lot of district heating. So there's solutions, there's renewable alternatives for going beyond combustion, and there's, of course, we have biomass combustion also for district heating. But we try to move away from combustion and go for the geothermal and waste heat sources. But for many heat solutions, there as well, electrification is the way. forward. So there is a great demand for electricity. This is the same for industry. So in order to, we keep saying this, but we are a country which is a cold climate, long distances, sparse population, and we have a lot of heavy industry. So if we can do climate neutrality, we think all can. But that heavy industry also means that we have steel production, metal production that is, if we go for hydrogen technologies, that will increase our electricity demand even for more. So our challenge is to keep the pace of creating new generation of renewables there. So what we need, you need to have efficiency at the same time. So we cannot, we must make sure that our system is smart and efficient. So we have potential for onshore wind, we have potential for offshore wind, and we have what's an asset for us, I think, as well, is a good grid, national grid operator that has been forward-lookingly investing in the grid, investing in connections to Sweden. I think I was proud to see that a couple of weeks ago there was in Sweden there was I think 3 or 4 different electricity prices in the country that were the electricity price down south was 3 times the electricity price up north. In Finland we have 1 price, and we're actually more or less the price of north of Sweden because we have a good grid. So you need a good grid, and you need to invest in the national grid, but you also need the local grid to be good. And we need things like two-way chargers, charging network in buildings. So you need to connect to the cities and buildings and companies. So what would be so we think that there is the potential to create the renewable electricity. We also have some new nuclear coming online. What are the barriers? Would be developing the infrastructure, making sure that the investment happens. Also some market rules. We want to encourage the self-supply of electricity energy. This should be possible also for shops, commercial surfaces. We have to make sure that our taxation policy doesn't discourage that, because all that self-generation will reduce the pressure. Our district heating network is a great asset these days. We can also use that to store and heat energy when the electricity price is low or even negative. Then e-fuels come in. But we have to make sure that our regulations are there to encourage that. And one thing is that I think we have to say that some of the energy companies are also a bit used to their monopoly role, so they might not be the most agile ones to be the agents of change. So, for example, our district heating network, in order to bring in the waste heat streams and heat pumps and ambient heat, the level of the temperature of the water would need to be reduced, and that requires a bit of investment, and it needs to be done by everyone in the network. And we need those companies to be running after and going after the solutions with their clients. And also, this applies also, I think, to the energy efficiency, how to get to the building stock which doesn't have a huge value. It's a big country. We have a lot of areas where the population is decreasing. People are moving to cities. Those buildings, that building stock doesn't have a huge value. So it's difficult to ask people to invest in new windows, insulation, new technologies in buildings that don't have value. Also, the banks don't give you loans. So we have to find solutions that we bring the energy companies and their business sense into this, so that we are able to get the efficiency into the system. I think I will just leave it at there.
Okay, thank you very much. So next, we could have Andy Manning, please. If you want to do your introductory remarks.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I'm Andy Manning. I lead the Energy Networks and Systems team at Citizens Advice. So just to give a little bit of background to Citizens Advice, I'm sure you all know Citizens Advice provides support to millions of people every year for whatever problems they've got. But we've also got a specific role in energy. We're the official watchdog in energy, with a role to be the statutory advocate for consumers in the energy market. And as part of that, over 1 million energy consumers engage with us every year. So that gives insights into what are the real problems that people are facing today and what are the challenges they'll have they'll have in the future. And why this is particularly important is because if the UK is going to reach its climate change goals, consumers are essential as part of that. As Murdo was saying about the phasing out of gas boilers, more or less every household in the country is going to have to make massive, massive changes. Now, the good news is consumers are willing to change, but they need help understanding what are the right changes for them, how to go about making those changes, and what to do if things go wrong. Now, smart systems can deliver real benefits to consumers, but they have to be built on consumer trust and consumer confidence. So what we found through our focus groups is what consumers really value is trusted, impartial, unbiased advice when they're making choices about which low carbon technologies they go for, and in terms of low carbon heat. So what I'd say we need to sit alongside the net zero strategy is a consumer engagement strategy. And a particular aspect of that, I think we touched on fuel poverty earlier, what we've got to make sure is those consumers that are worse served by the energy market at the moment, so those in fuel poverty, the digitally excluded, those in private rented property, are the winners as we go forward. So they need to be a particular focus of our engagement approach. And one other big takeaway from the focus groups we use is the need for consumer protection to keep up with the changes in the market. The market will become more complicated with more players. You may have someone who optimises how your electric car is charged, for example, or you may be choosing to install some batteries into your home. So this makes it more complicated with more players. So in the current market, consumers know where to go if something goes wrong. They know to approach their supplier, or mostly know to approach their supplier. Whereas the customer journey is going to become more complicated. So we need to sort out this consumer protection up front. Because if we get started on this journey and things go wrong, and these horror stories start making their way around the industry, we're behind when we start. So we need to get the consumer protections in place ahead of the changes. So to summarise forward, what we need is a strategy towards consumer engagement to make sure guidance and support can be delivered in a joined-up approach, consistent across the UK, and consumer protections need to keep up, or preferably be ahead of the developments in the market.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So the first one would be around, you said you've done focus group discussions with communities who revealed to you what they want. Have you got any reflections from past interventions, such as smart meters, the rollout of smart meters, or even just how consumers feel about installing heat pumps, which is what the UK government's driving forward today? Have you got any reflections from what consumers think about
So
those?
I think if you look at heat pumps, that's where we are on the journey, isn't it? Because there's not a great awareness of other heat technologies. But I do think what our research on heat pumps shows us is that we need to get away from the discussion about technologies. What people want are the outcomes. They want a warm home, something they can control, and at an affordable price. And they don't tend then to be too worried about what the technology is. It's those outcomes that they're after.
Thank you. So what's your thoughts on consumer engagement with the net zero strategy?
I think it's really important. I mean, just that last point about heat pumps, how people heat their homes with heat pumps is completely different to how people heat their homes with gas central heating. And heat pumps aren't a solution in lots of building types, particularly in dense urban areas. What I actually like to see the government doing is one, having a comprehensive strategy about this, saying in this type of environment we're going to have this heating system, the other type of environment we have another heating system, and creating incentives for that. But actually, I think one really easy thing the government could do, and they could implement it from next year, is say that every boiler manufactured in the UK, and the majority of boilers that are installed in the UK, manufactured in the UK, is hydrogen ready. In the same way that we got ready for the TV, we had HD ready TVs for years. People said, why are we doing this? Nobody's got HD. But they're HD ready. And then when HD came on stream, everybody had, well, not everybody, but a lot of people had the TVs. If we did that, then we'd be ready for 2030, 2032 transition. If we don't do that, it'll be impossible. and the manufacturer are ready for it. They just need the signal. It would just take a statutory instrument in Parliament next week saying 2023 every boiler is hydrogen ready, and it would happen.
Interesting. Thank you very much. If we could now move on to Professor James Yu, please, for your introductory remarks.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
colleagues. It's always making me nervous, sit beside politicians. and I'm an engineer. Hopefully, I give you a little bit different perspective about what we have been discussing so far. From my straightforward engineering world, Winston Churchill did say that the world requires lots of engineers, but we don't want to be an engineering world. So that is the position I am. That give you two figures, if I may. First of all, the flexibility of the whole system energy will mean 17 to 40 billion pounds saving for the GB PLC. So that means that what we want is that not only about the gas, heat, electricity, it's about the holistic approach towards this topic. Second, as my colleagues mentioned earlier already, is about the EV charging. As an example, what that means. Forgive my biased view as an electrical engineer, that the electrical vehicle in Scotland alone, that would double the demand we have now. What that means? What means that is that we will profoundly rethink, redesign, reinvest, and reoperate the way we're organizing at the moment. I had the pleasure to work with talented, committed colleagues all around the world in our sector, including Fingrid, that we have been working in the European Commission 2015 to 2020. What I noticed is that what we have is the right technology. I don't believe that we need to advance those technologies like rocket science, moon landing. No. What's important is actually about people. People on both sides and in the process. We heard about Annie talk about the people as customer, that their behavior, their willingness of engaging will decide how fast we can roll. People like our great policy makers. You decide the strategic and the pace we're going to make on. And people like myself, engineers, hopefully we want to make things happen. What keeps me awake is not about technology. It's how I can have a right skilled team to fulfill those commitments, to fulfill the ambition set out and required by our customers, saying that, okay, by 2035, all the Scottish rail will have no diesel trains. By 2035, in Scotland, we will be carbon neutral. That is what keeps me awake. So that's why I want to share with you. I can see the audience at your average age, that I'm on the wrong side of your average age, obviously. So I want to call upon your interest and understanding of engineering and the importance of how to realize, how to facilitate that transformation and transition for the country. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I had a look on your LinkedIn, and it said that you were the driving force behind numerous flagship innovation projects at SP Energy Networks. I was wondering if you could provide an example of some of the projects you've been working with that would help towards decarbonisation.
Thanks, Rebecca. Don't want to put you guys on sleeping mood, but very example is that Fingrid colleagues working with me back in 2015 on the Horizon 2020, that we identified what is the limit. Murdo mentioned about the triangle of things: affordability, reliability, and the sustainability. Now, what we worked with our European engineers is about how can we ensure the light is still on when we have 100% renewables in our network. That was, we started the journey 2015. And that is the first European level collaboration of the engineering sector of the reliability of network. The next one I want to introduce you is what we are currently working about heat. That in Scotland, and the whole UK, heat represents 37% carbon emission. What that means, exactly as Terry mentioned, we are looking at the potential alternative ways. One is we are working with Scottish government to look at how to use heat pump as well as heat storage to provide that flexibility and controllability, not compromise our living standard, but also be good to the environment. Another is a seasonal, cross-seasonal distributed heat network. I definitely will echo what Murdo said earlier. We don't have one silver bullet point, unfortunately. We don't. However desired, despite all the best wishes we want, we require different tools for different scenarios. So my priority, if I may share with colleagues, heat is current priority. The next priority will be hydrogen. Yeah. And my position is to understand what that means. When our policymakers decided to do that, I want to understand what that means to us and how to facilitate that. Thanks for that question, Rebecca.
So it sounds like we've got the ideas and the engineer. Terry, what about the policy? What policies in Finland are really driving the uptake of these engineerings and innovations?
Well, I think I briefly mentioned the role of taxation, and I think that's something that my government has now done is to reduce actually the taxation. So we have a lot of taxes on and on emissions. So progressive from that perspective, but at the same time we realize that we've been taxing electricity too much. So when the electricity grid is decarbonizing and we want to promote electrification for industry and for different users, we needed to reduce the tax on electricity. So we've reduced it for industrial uses lower, and especially also for heat pumps, heat pumps producing to electricity grids. And I think there's still scope to look at those commercial surfaces to make sure that the incentives are right. So maybe we need to look at the taxation of, let's say, your shop and your IKEA store, and you're having some solar power panels on your rooftop. Are you electricity generator? Are you taxed for it, or do you get to use it for your own use and put it to the grid with the more beneficial? I think it's in the interest of all of us to make sure that self-generation happens. So we should be looking at that. So there's that type of course. It's not a big problem for the new, for example, we were talking about heat and buildings. The new buildings are not such a problem. I think there we also need regulation. We need to look at the whole, and we're now putting in place regulation to look at the whole life cycle of buildings, also the building materials and the carbon footprint of the whole building and the heat system and energy system included. But of course, the challenges are with the existing building stock. So there as well, we need to look at the energy supply sector and how we can make sure that existing supply and companies work well. And I would just want to echo the comments made on consumer protection and consumer policy or politics there, because it's true that also for the energy efficiency of buildings, a consumer might be buying new windows, but if they're installed poorly, that you pay a lot, but there is no benefit. And how isn't every individual going to be an expert on installation of? So you need there needs to be systems to ensure that there's quality and that consumers have then protection. So there.
Thank you very much. If we could now move on to Dan, please, for your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for having this event. I mean, it's a complicated black box, isn't it? The one entitled How to Save the World from Climate Change. And the one component of that, undoubtedly, is a smart, flexible energy network. That's what my company is specialist in fact, with a consumer engagement body in Britain for the smart meter rollout. And as a result of being a consumer engagement body, I tend to think of things in consumer terms. So I actually don't like terms like renewables, because I don't think those are understandable to the people I'm mostly concerned with, who are, consumers, citizens, who do recognize things like wind energy and solar energy. And, you know, I guess at the heart of it, we have to stop burning things to live the lives that we want to lead, and we have to start powering those by more electricity from wind and solar power, and electrify lots of things that aren't electrified. You know, it's sort of, in a way, simple. But of course, there the snags begin, because wind and solar power doesn't behave the way you want it to, you know. It has been said that the sun doesn't shine as much as we would like it in the UK, and not necessarily exactly when we would want it to. The wind doesn't blow in the middle of Coronation Street when everyone wants to make a cup of tea. You know, it tends to blow in the middle of the night when energy requirements from us as consumers or businesses is lower. So how do you deal with that? You know, one of the ways of dealing with that, obviously, is lots of short-term storage. You know, that's probably, the question about that is for another person. But the smart, flexible network, that is something that is happening in the UK, and it's exciting. So I sort of tend to think about this by analogy. So smart meters, they're a bit like sat-nav. So I came here in a taxi with Andy. The driver had a map app that was up, that was, through the use of data from all users and historic data, was effectively helping the driver get us to our destination via the most efficient route. Okay, and that's, you know, that's basically what smart meter data does. It helps the system, engineers in the system, move energy around the network in the most efficient way possible. Yes, you can still get from A to B without it, but if you have a smart system, you're going to get there much more efficiently, and that has enormous benefits in terms of both time and money. And then when you overlay on top of that the concept of the driverless car into my example, which is smart devices that learn how you operate and automatically change according to the behaviors that you have been showing in the past, then you see something where I think the issues related to wind and solar power become much more manageable. The other thing, which is sort of tremendously exciting and has been mentioned, is, you know, what happens at the other end of the telescope. So if that's all at the network end, you know, as a consumer, so in my world, there's this term that energy is a very low interest category. Consumers don't have much interest in it, but given how much we're all reliant upon it, that is amazing. And part of the reason is because it's all so seemingly unknowable. So if we just look at sort of a retail relationship that I have with the energy industry, I sort of basically, I'm on a package, I pay one flat price, and that price I'm charged at whatever time of day I use electricity. But of course it turns out that if you're generating electricity in the middle of the night, the cost of production is lower. Via a time of use tariff, you need to find a better term for that, because it's not particularly consumer friendly, but I haven't got to that one yet. I can charge through an app on my phone. I can tell my smart device, an EV, let's say, with my smart meter. I can tell it I want to leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to go this far, so I need this much energy in the battery. It'll then draw down energy at the cheapest possible price, unbeknownst to me, because I'll be sleeping. Into my car. But the absolutely brilliant thing is that I can then use that cheap energy later on in the day, as you already can with a Nissan Leaf in Japan, to boil the kettle in the middle of Coronation Street when electricity is much more expensive. And fascinating, the story, the experiences in Japan. You know, when they've had outages in Japan, all countries do, but they've had outages. The reverse polarity on the Nissan Leaf charger literally meant that people who had if your street was out of energy, everyone were going, if you want a cup of tea, go down to number 42, because they've got a Nissan Leaf, and they could boil the kettle from the electricity in the battery. That is a fantastically exciting future, and it is the result of clever people inventing products with a smart system which will make your life better. Some of those things they'll be better with a smart system, and some of them will only happen with a smart system. And that is why, you know, in the government's net zero strategy, having a clean electricity system is the foundation stone of it, and one of the foundation stones of that is a successful smart meter rollout. Thank you.
Great. So do you think the bigger picture is we have electric vehicles and we've got, electrified homes, and they all talk to one another and they can make you understand whether you should be conserving energy or buying energy because it's cheap, because there's wind blowing? Will we need 5G for all of our homes to be connected to this type of data collection? Will we need to know the weather forecasts, perhaps?
Well, I
tell
think
whether
that all
the
of
winds
those,
are in?
I do think all of those things will be possible. Not everybody will want them, and 5% of the population isn't even online. But but for just a fascinating sidebar fact, we have measured that before COVID, 10% of the British population were not online. As a result of COVID, terrible time that we've all had, but silver lining, the number of people who are not online in the UK has halved. So more and more people will have access to these services. And I think that, this concept of a low interest category for consumers, when you give people the information in a usable format. So, Samsung have just launched an app which I've connected my smart devices that I'm lucky enough to have at home into, and they tell me via data from smart meters how much energy I'm using for each of those things and how I can change my energy behavior in order to be a more green consumer. I can choose not to do that. I happen to choose to do that. And I do think that this whole sort of concept of consumers becoming more engaged is going to be transformed. I happen to think that there's going to be a world, where at the moment where I buy electricity and I use it. In the future, I'll be able to create it myself in much more accessible way. I'll be able to store it in my car battery, but I'll also be able to trade it. I think there'll be a whole kind of eBay-style world of people running micro businesses, good entrepreneurial activity, trading energy that they might have created or stored at a different price to the one that they're selling it at.
Great.
Interesting.
May I chip in?
Yes.
Sorry, Rebecca. Colleagues, I think that Dan described a very rosy picture. May I, from engineer perspective, to say something? Again, I think that math is a language everybody can understand. Do you know how much you are paying for the electricity network every year? Do you know that? £20. That is all you paid each household in this country to the electricity company. So, Terry, we're not the monster, we're not the enemy of the people. No, it's not. Do you know what's your reliability? Which means how chance you have outage. In this country, despite our asset is quite old, maybe some of that is 40, 50 years old, the reliability of this country's electricity supply is 99.99%. So all this rosy picture Dan just described has a one default assumption, which is you have a reliable electricity network to back you up, to ensure that when you need it, when the Nissan leaves or whatever, when the wind is blowing or not blowing, that this security is on your back. You don't need to worry, my phone is dead. You don't need to worry who's going to Twitter. You don't need to worry, how can I switch on my electricity? This is what I want to, if I may, take advantage of my position as an engineer and understanding the inside of the sector. This is what we want to maintain. People do not realize that this country, despite it's a small island, is in the leading position of energy innovation in the whole world. This country should be proud of what we have done for the global decarbonization, despite we are only 1% of the total carbon emission. Scotland, we far from 100% green. We're exporting green electricity. That's why I think, if I may say, Terry, since you are from Finland, I'm very proudly say, as a Scottish Chinese or British Chinese, whatever you view it, is that I'm very proud, very grateful for the regulatory framework we have in the energy sector.
Thank you. So I'm receiving some questions from our online audience, and if you are online, please do submit using the Slido link that you'll find in the description below. So this is aimed for you, Alex. It says, what is the Labour's policy position on decarbonising home heat and EVs?
I'm not the Labour spokesperson for this. Alan Whitehead is. So whatever I say, hopefully I won't upset Alan. I would broadly support the zero emission vehicle mandate, but wait and see the detail. So the government haven't released the detail of the mandate, but we want quite a heavy mandate, quite a high percentage mandate, and quite a quick turnover. Because what we're worried about is that the heavy lifting on EVs is going to come much closer to 2030, which will actually be much harder for ordinary people, and we need to have a real smooth glide path down to 2030. And what was the other bit?
So for decarbonising home heat
Home
and
heat.
EVs.
Yeah, so I think the EVs I've covered. So the home heat, it is about having the mix. So it's more or less what I said, because not I think we're calling for much more state intervention with insulation. So there's no point going forward with poorly insulated homes, and secondly, around having the right solution for the right area, and also having state intervention on things like heat pumps, because the cost of heat pumps is incredible. So it's not just about market signals, but those are important. But it's also about subsidy and supporting the installation of those. But there's also a whole workforce issue. If we said tomorrow every house that could have a ground or air source heat pump, we're going to get a ground or air source heat pump installed, we don't have the trained workforce to do that. So there's the big workforce issues as well.
Great, thank you very much. I would now like to open up for questions from the floor. So if you have a question, please wait for the roaming mic, because we have our online audience. So if we could go to this gentleman here, please, first. If you could just say your name and your organisation.
Hi there, thank you. My name's Rob Jeffrey. I work for Field Consulting. We're a communications agency. The panel's talked a lot about carbon reduction, but I'd be interested in the panel's views on carbon removals. It's widely recognised that to deliver net zero, we need to directly remove emissions from the atmosphere, whether that's through bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, because there's a lot of industries and sectors. Terry was talking about heavy industry in Finland, aviation, that can't get to absolute net zero. So I'd be interested in people's views on carbon removals as an area.
Thank you very much. If I could go to Murdo, please. I'd like to...
Yeah, thank you, Rob. A really good question. And I know there are some people who argue that net zero doesn't go far enough, because I should be looking for below zero, even though that's a strange concept. But we've actually got to start reducing the amount of carbon instead of just adding to it. I think that a key policy area here is carbon capture and storage. Now, we saw in the budget announcement of the initial pilot in the north of England, and the project in Scotland in the northeast will be a reserve to that. This is still quite experimental. It's potentially very expensive, but the wins from it could be very substantial if we're able to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere and find a way of storing it and potentially making use of it at the same time. So there is quite a lot of work going on in this area. I'll defer to my engineering colleague, James, who probably will know more about the technology than I will. I'm sure can talk with more expertise, but it does just show that there is interest at a government level in making this happen, and a realisation that this will be part of a range of solutions that we need to find.
Thank you. James, do you have anything to say?
Thanks. Wonderful. Politicians are very good at that, isn't it? So thank you for that. Thanks. So what keeps me ongoing, I think that despite all my cynical view most of the time, what keeps me going and positive is about the committed and dedicated colleagues, particularly the new generations we have. Yesterday, I joined the session with the French company called Sunpulse. I'm sure you heard about that. They're using the photovoltaic as a pure fuel to fly around the world. It's happening just beside us. So it's not that we do not have this technology to remove the carbon or that, as Murdo mentioned, it's about cost, it's about customer willingness, it's about how strong our desire is to change our life So what I can say is that I can assure Murdo as well as colleagues that we do have the technology, we do have engineering means, should the policy is right, should the framework is right, should our customer demand us to do so.
Great, thank you. Terry?
Thanks. Just wanted to say it's a very good question, and our climate neutrality target by 2035 is consistent with 1.5 degrees science only if we go climate positive or carbon negative thereafter. So we need to increase our removals. We think that we need to increase our forest carbon or forest sink, but also there's a role for other technical removals. And in Finland we still have a lot of bioenergy. The forest industry uses a lot of waste and residue streams for their energy, and so there is some biogenic CO2 that could be captured. And now there's ideas and development to use it for recycle it with hydrogen to e-fuels and others, but it could also be fixed through fixing it in some types of carbonates. Or I think in Finland the CCS is less. I don't think we have underground storage areas that are good for CCS, but I think there is also a role of recycling that CO2, even if we don't immediately, we're not able to fix it. And I think also in some of the industries like cement production, I just heard that we are having a demo plant on using an electric furnace for cement production, and that has the additional benefits of removing half of the emissions from fossil fuel use, but also then the CO2 that is produced is very clean. So it's very good for reusing in other industrial applications the CO2 and combining. But I think that's indeed something that we have to be looking at is removals.
And also Alex, and then Dan also has something to add.
I've been sort of tracking and meeting people and talking about CCUS from well before I was an MP, and I have to say progress is very slow. We don't have working models at scale, and I'm not too bothered about the cost. I would say that as I'm a socialist, but once you've got the solution, then the costs come down because you scale it up, right? But I think we'd make much more progress if we invested as much in reforestation, in peat, and in seagrass and kelp than chasing technological solutions. And so I'd want to see more investment in those, because actually all of those don't really have a repayment mechanism apart from carbon offset. While CCUS does. If you've got a workable solution for CCUS, you'll have a lot of customers straight away. But there's no customers for seagrass or kelp really, or peat. Well, there is, but that's sort of the opposite of what we want, is people taking the peat out and selling it, and peat stay in.
Great. Dan?
I'm not an expert in this subject, but as you have all worked out, I'm an optimist. And I have a great belief in human beings' ability and ingenuity. We got ourselves into this problem, and we have shown that we can get ourselves out of problems. So I'm one of the things that I am really interested in with this, because it is clear that there has been quite a lot of technical and engineering development on this subject, but there's a group of people in our race who's fantastically good at taking things out of the ground and putting them somewhere else. So why, if we were to find some sort of judo move to incentivize and persuade that group of human experts to take something out of the air and put it in the ground, then I think we might really make some progress.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? We can take this lady here first, please. Just the mic.
Thank you. Katie Privet from the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership. My question's primarily directed at Andy. You mentioned that it's important to have a trusted source of information for citizens to decarbonise their homes. And I've cheekily got a two-part question here. How far and how fast do you think that vulnerable households can take up digital and smart technology to sort of bring together the two ends of the puzzle? And how do you think a service like that should be funded, and where should it be run out of to have the maximum benefit for citizens and for a balancing grid?
Okay, thank you, Katie. So on the first part about how fast, I think I'm not. I think we need to get started on it now is the key, and it needs to run ahead of the net zero strategy. We have to have this in place to allow people to engage with now. So we need to get started on it now, if that makes sense. And I guess that comes down to as soon as possible. And I think you're right. I think you're implying that there's particular challenges for engaging with customers in vulnerable circumstances. I think that is absolutely right, which is why we need a strategy to begin now. And I think we haven't planned out the details of this, but it's a national framework that then links into advice on the ground. So we've got to make this as inclusive as possible. I think Dan was talking about how there's more people on the internet, but we've still got to include those people who aren't digitally confident. So it's about having this a national framework, but underneath it, making sure people can still get face-to-face advice on a local level. I think in some ways the key point I'm trying to make is that we have to put as much effort into planning our consumer engagement as we do to the technical advancements that we make.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question, please? Yep, this gentleman here in the shirt.
Hi. My name is James Nash. I'm from the University of Strathclyde. I'm doing a PhD in wind. My question was aimed at, I guess, Mundo Fraser, because he's from the governing party. It's about nuclear. I appreciate the need to create a stable wind and to have a stable baseload. But my issue really is that we don't have a long-term storage facility for nuclear and really a way to deal with the waste. And it doesn't even really seem like there's any funding there to develop the technologies in order to utilize the waste. For example, some of the new Generation 4 reactors that actually utilize waste or that have closed fuel cycles. So my question is, are you looking into dealing with the waste, and do you have a strategy to actually deal with the waste long term rather than just storing it somewhere and forgetting about it and letting it leak into the soil and damage our ecosystem? Thanks.
Thanks, James. I mean, it's a really important question, and I think one of the things that's been interesting about this debate is the way that nuclear power has come back onto the agenda, because people had to realise that, as I was trying to say earlier, we're going to need a mix of technologies to fulfil our power needs in future, and particularly with the need to increase the electricity output. While the mix of renewable technologies we've been talking about is really important, some of them haven't taken off in the way we would have hoped. So, I can remember even going back 20 years, there was a great aspirations that, tidal or wave power would be the next generation of renewable energy. And that hasn't really happened because the technology that allows power to be taken from the sea is just too expensive, because you cannot basically construct the kit robustly enough to withstand the pressures in the sea at an affordable level. Now, we may get there, but right at the moment we're looking at a gap, and that's why I think it is encouraging to see nuclear coming back on. Now, the point you make about waste is absolutely correct. So some of the more new nuclear technologies are looking at how you can recycle that waste or reuse it. But we're going to have to accept from older generations, some of it will be stored. Some of it may be stored for hundreds of years to come. And essentially we have to decide, are we confident that that storage is secure enough that we can protect the wider environment, and therefore we are prepared to make that assessment, because that is a price worth paying then to have that low carbon source of energy. And personally, I think we should make that choice, but I can understand from an environmental perspective, others might take a different view. But personally, I think it's worth doing.
Thank you very much. Another question from the audience? The lady next.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kelly, also a PhD researcher at Strathclyde. It's actually interesting, it was about tidal power, so it's great you mentioned it. It has the potential to produce, I think it's 40% of the UK's electricity needs. And unlike, like Dan was saying, the sun never shines when we want, I can tell you today when the tides are going to be in 50 years' time. It's completely predictable. My question is, I guess, for the engineers, how do you see that integrated into the grid? And for the politicians, more, how can we, like you say, how can we encourage tidal to become a part of the UK energy mix? Like, what can we set? Can we put like a pot aside in AR4 and things like that? Like, what can we do to make it a viable technology?
Thank you. Yep, we'll start with Alex and then James, maybe if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at this. We looked at Tidal Wave in the Environmental Audit Committee when I was a member of the Environmental Audit Committee, and there's been a lot of disappointment that Swansea didn't go ahead, backed by the UK government. They're now talking about and very brave of the local authority, but of going ahead, taking the risk on themselves. And I think once we've got a working model, then I think it will go. We've got, as you said, lots of opportunity around the UK for tidal barrages. But I think they are at scale, so it's a bit different to wind or wave. But I think if we amended how contracts for difference work to include tidal, then I think that would give enough subsidy to bring schemes forward. So, for instance, like the scheme on the Mersey, which they're proposing.
Great, thank you. James, any
Thanks,
thoughts?
Rebecca. Thanks, Sarah, for your question. Given that my wife is not going to watch it, may I share with you some secret? That I invested into a Tidal company shares 5 years ago, and I have only 10% left in my pocket. So that is a vulnerable customer perspective.
I'll make a note.
Yeah. Okay. So jokes apart, Sarah, you know that in Scotland again, as well as in Wales, we are at the forefront of this technology. We have European Marine Centre in Orkney, and we're extremely proud of that actually. So, as Alex rightly pointed out, that thanks also looking at the carbon capture, all that technology, Alex. I admire your knowledge on all that. So what I would suggest is that it's all about timing. That would not discourage my faith of technology or our commitment to the environment. Look at this country. Look at the country around or similar others, even Finland. That we still have great potential around us, just beside us on the sea. It doesn't make any sense if we can't make use of it. So therefore, despite my financial losses, and I still have very strong commitment. And what we mentioned is that grid connection, Rebecca, as you know yourself, as a great researcher on that topic, is that have to be considered, please, because when these remote areas have the generation asset, how to get access to grid cheaply, reliably, it is a factor we have to consider as early as possible. So one possibility is that we produce hydrogen just beside it, or have battery and transmit those as an alternative way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Another question? Yeah, this gentleman at the back.
Hi, I'm Noah Ghali. I work with the British Conservation Alliance. The Adam Smith Institute recently produced an estimate that if the UK was to become totally reliant on renewable energy, the reserve battery capacity would cost about £2.9 trillion and 2 years' worth of the entire world's battery production. How do we deal with what is very likely to be a very impending scramble for those kind of resources internationally? Because ultimately, though we may be a quite large player on the world stage, we're not that large of a country.
Thank you very much. Anyone want to jump in on this one?
I've got to go in a minute, so I'll come in on this. So,
yep.
I think that you've just described a global problem, and actually, without getting too much into geopolitics, we might have looked at some recent geopolitical events which have maybe driven certain countries and their attitudes to the outcomes of those geopolitical events. But I think that this is why we need to think, one, about the grid and flexibility, but we've sort of talked about the zero emissions vehicle aspect of it. But I think the other aspect is we need to look at alternatives for storage of electricity. So storage hydro is one. There's a lot of potential in Scotland, and there already are schemes, and in Wales, not so much in England or Northern Ireland. But the other one, where I think the UK can be a world leader, we already are a world leader, is in green hydrogen, and it's very flexible. So if you take that excess electricity and turn it into hydrogen, you can use it to power heavy vehicles, because we're going to really struggle with lorries, electric lorries, right? It's very heavy. A lot of batteries are required, while hydrogen is a good fuel for them. There's potential in home heating, there's potential in steel and other manufacturing, but also you can turn hydrogen back into electricity as well. It's not very efficient. The engineers are all going to say that, but it's still a potential. And if the choice is, effectively creating global instability because everybody's racing for rare earth metals, or a bit of inefficiency because we're burning hydrogen, I'd rather take the latter.
Great, thank you very much. Dan, do you have any points to make on that?
I mean, it's not my particular area of expertise. It's clear that there is going to need to be a considerable sort of advance on a mass scale in storage. I mean, I'm naturally, from what I've said, interested in the consumer end of things, and I do think when you start to look at don't look at it as a car, look at it as a battery on wheels that happens to be on wheels. I do think that there is a lot of potential at the consumer end of the telescope.
Great, thank you, Terry.
Just wanted to say, I think going for 100% renewables will require storage, but it doesn't have to be the same batteries that we use today. So I'm a great believer in battery technology. I think there's universities in Finland that are developing great stuff, and other universities elsewhere are probably even more so. So I'm a great believer that there will, once the demand is there, we will have other technologies that use probably resources that are more available. But I also find that it's important that now that we have this also for transport, when we go for electric vehicles, and that's where probably the rare earth batteries are now first needed, that we should have the policies, and for the EU we should we should use the power of our markets to ensure that the production, the supply chains for those battery rare earths are sustainable, that we should really not accept that human rights are tramped and child labor is involved in producing our vehicles. And by the way, I just learned that it's 30 phones like this is one car battery. And so we also have a problem with all of our appliances, and the car batteries are going to be well recycled. So that's another good point. And then we have the other potential for their use beyond just driving. But I think it's a challenge, but there's technology, and our professors will solve this for us.
Thank you.
Thanks for that comment.
So I have a question from Derek, who's on one of our online viewers, which fits in quite well with everything we've been saying. And Derek is asking, how will all of this be paid for equitably? Or will we end up with those that are tech savvy being subsidised by the poor? Has anyone got some thoughts on that? Yep.
I don't mind starting. So I think first of all, there's a question about how we recover the costs at the moment. I think we spoke about CFDs, didn't we, earlier? So that all appears on the customer bill. And as I think we know, that for people in lower incomes, customer bill forms a bigger part of their monthly outgoing. So there's that question about, fundamentally, should these costs appear on bills, or would it be better to move them into taxation? So that's one question. And then second about how it gets paid for, and how do we make sure everyone gets to play along. I think Alex touched on this earlier. We do need to look at what is the financial support, what schemes are available in general for financing, but in particular for lower incomes. This is going to need grants to make the technology investments available for people on lower incomes.
Great. Mardo, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right to say that those in the most vulnerable groups will definitely need support. But I think it's wrong to look at the cost of technology now and assume that will be the ultimate cost of rollout. Andy was talking earlier about the cost of heat pumps, and he's absolutely right. Heat pumps are very expensive now, but the more popular they become, the more we will see costs reduce. And we've seen that already with electric vehicles, where the cost is coming down quite dramatically. I remember when I chaired the Energy Committee in the Scottish Parliament, which is now about 10 years ago. In that period, we were regularly lobbied by companies in the renewable sector, in wind and solar, who would come to us and complain, the government's cutting our subsidies, it's going to kill our industry, we'll all lay off all our workforce. And of course, what happened was every time the subsidy was reduced, they just found more efficiencies, and the cost came down. And now we have onshore wind, I think I'm right in saying, that has no subsidy and can still be developed economically. And we're seeing solar continuing to expand despite the fact subsidy has been substantially reduced. So I think it is overly pessimistic just to look at these huge price tags in the billions of pounds and say we can't afford that, because once we start the market moving, competition will bring the price down.
Great, thank you very much. I have a question aimed at Dan. What role do you think the public play in supporting the transition to low carbon?
Yeah, massive. Because I think, the Committee on Climate Change, they've calculated that more than half of what's still left to be done will involve some kind of consumer behaviour change. And I think there's a lot of confusion out there amongst consumers. We spend all of our time trying to persuade consumers of the benefits of smart meters. And what we found in all of that, in fact, we're publishing a report this week on it, is that, for starters, most consumers just don't understand the science of all of this. They understand some of the consequences, and in fact, this has changed a little bit in the near term, because in the past it was about melting ice caps and polar bears, which for most people is over there. In all honesty, now people are experiencing milder winters, hotter summers, and it's the extremes of weather that people are really noticing, flooding particularly in the UK. And so it does feel much more close to home. But, a lot of the language, for example, that is used, that we use, it's just totally ships in the night for consumers. As I said, people don't understand what renewables mean, but they do understand what wind and solar means, because they see a picture of a modern day windmill and a solar panel on someone's roof. They don't. I would say less than 10% of people, our research shows, have any idea what net zero means. But they do understand what stopping global warming means, or stopping climate change means. People don't even really understand in a mainstream way what carbon emissions are, but they understand what carbon dioxide is because they were taught about that at school. And some people understand what greenhouse gases are. So I think there's a whole kind of world there that needs to change from the industry. And, one of the things that I would observe, it's sort of easy for me, because I don't come from the energy industry. I come from the television industry. This is the first time I've worked outside the television industry. And one thing that I would observe, it is not a very consumer-oriented industry. And I understand why that is, because producing energy and distributing it around the system at the right time so that there's only 0.1% of outage is an incredibly complicated task. So you need engineers to do that. But the engineers, James being a notable exception, don't necessarily always think as in consumer terms. All the work I do starts with a consumer and says, what's a consumer need and how do I talk to consumers? So I do now. Sort of the good news is, though, that there's a more limited range of subjects than people might think that need to be tackled in order to reach the promised land. So, electric vehicles are happening, and that's because there's a whole kind of industry of manufacturers putting all of their effort into that. Heat is undoubtedly going to be more of an issue. I think the thing with heat is, what I'd like to see is, where's the human ingenuity going into product innovation there? That's what I'd like to see. There's clearly going to be lots required in terms of diet, and I think that when the consumer is put in the centre of all of this and put in the centre of the solutions, you get better solutions. The final thing I would say, just by way of further reiterating my credentials for optimism, is that the messages that, in our experience, tend to be much more effective are positive ones. So crudely, save the world rather than we're all going to die is more effective. And that is really encouraging about humanity. And there is a growing sense, which another silver lining of the pandemic is, that it has created even greater of a sense of we're all in this together and we all need to do our little bit for the greater good.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add to that?
Just to put something back to Dan, I wonder in fact if it's even more simplistic than that. And you might be able to try and persuade consumers that, for example, if they charge their appliances at night rather than during the day, they might save the world. But if they're actually, you can tell them they're going to save money, is that not a bigger driver for changing behaviour?
That's a very good point. I think it's the combination of those two things. So it's, we call them me benefits, what that directly benefit me, and we benefits, which benefit all of us. And it's the combination, I think, of those two things. I mean, the truth is, it's sort of, it's different strokes for different folks. Some people respond to different things. But in the round, what we have found is that creating the right metrics of a mix of those messages for different people, that is the most effective formula.
Interesting, thank you. Terry, what about the public in Finland? Are they welcoming new innovations into their home? They are pro installing heat pumps and solar panels. What's the story on your side?
I think so. I think that people in Finland are rather technology optimistic as well. And I know quite a few people that would have their smart meters and smart electricity contracts where they would start their washing machines at night and heat their homes depending. And so I think there's quite a bit of excitement, and there's these apps are pretty neat. And I think it is something, but we have to also, I think there's potential with this transition, with the green transition and climate transition, there's potential to actually improve how citizens, that it might actually become cheaper if we make sure that all of this potential is available and that there's market incentives to develop it. Like I said, electric vehicles are so much more efficient that actually there's fairly quickly a potential for saving money. Also, if we use all the smart applications, we can actually improve the access of clean energy, and we can improve the consumer experience of how they move, how they heat, how they consume, how they service themselves in terms of energy. I think there's potential.
That's great, thank you very much. So I have some questions from the online audience, but is there anyone here with any other questions? Yep, this lady here, please.
Hi, my name is Jen Miller. I'm with Commonplace. I think one of the areas that seems to be missing still is how do you bring rural communities into this conversation? I'm from a really small town in Virginia, and we've had almost every byproduct from green energy tried to be forced upon us, and I think they're very resistant and against it. So I don't know who's best to take that, but would love to get your insight.
So maybe start with down here. Yep.
I don't mind having a go. So I think, there's work ongoing with local area mapping and planning, which needs to progress. So there's been lots of local area energy plans that various places have been running independently. So I think what we need is that needs to sit under a national framework to give it appropriate governance and give it the impetus to get going. So, and that should hopefully deliver the right plans for local areas, but sitting within a national picture, so we deliver the overall climate change goals. So I think we need to push on with developing the framework for the local area planning.
Murdo, you had something to add?
Yeah, Jen, I mean, it's a good question. I represent quite a large rural area in the Scottish Parliament. I can honestly say that in the last 2 decades, the issue that has generated more correspondence to me as an MSP than any other is the development of onshore wind. And, the number of letters I've had, the number of public meetings I've attended with communities really, really upset at large-scale wind farms being built on their doorstep when they can see no tangible benefit to them. So, with the greatest respect to James, companies like Scottish Power and others, large multinational companies coming in, building 150-metre turbines. Now, this might be saving the planet, but, if you're suddenly seeing an industrialization of your environment that has been untouched for hundreds of years, when you're seeing no benefit to you locally, it has a major negative impact. So I think the lesson we need to learn from that is communities have to see a benefit to them from these projects. And the more successful developments are the ones where there has been some form of direct community buy-in. So either they've been driven by the community themselves, or the community has had some sort of direct share in the profits or in in the money that's coming in. But otherwise, you end up with this horrible conflict situation. I've just seen too much of that.
So can I just add to that? So I think that's exactly right. And I think some things will help. We need a more coordinated approach to how we invest in the networks. That will need strategic, anticipatory investment, which does come with some risk to consumers, but for the reasons you're saying we need. And then once you've got it in a more coordinated way, that makes it easier to engage with communities. And I wonder whether there's a role for effectively some sort of negotiated settlement with those local communities, with some sort of representative of the community. And I think the deal you strike, so the reparations, whatever you want to call them, they need to be long-lasting benefits for that community. So not the classics, investing in the town hall. There needs to be things that will last for a good long time for the community.
Yep. And just to add, I was thinking to pose to the panel as well, do you think it's actually potentially more important for these rural communities to be brought up to speed with these technologies? They're the ones that are maybe living slightly off the grid, so actually more investment needs to be targeted at these communities.
May I
Yep.
chip in? Thanks. Jim, I think that if I may introduce two stories I have with you. One is that I have personally visited some farmers in the remote area in Scotland. They were very nervous. They feel they were left behind. But actually, if you can give them some tangible example, how can they help? For example, one chicken farmer, he's installed the solar power on his, but he cannot get access to the network. So what we try to provide him, and we did provide him, is a smart grid connection so that he can get access to network 10 years than originally planned. So those examples will give people the confidence. And as you mentioned, Rebecca, bring people along. Actually, I think that in America, we have a statement that the only thing for fear itself. Is that once you can get the example of how tangible the benefits of innovation as well as this renewable technology can do for you, I think you will be automatically part of it rather than being imposed as in your statement of this. Another example is about our remote area, rural area network rail. At the moment, we have decarbonization target. What we want to ensure is that our service for the passengers in the rural area will be increased and improved rather than be decreased. So therefore, I think that we treat that as an opportunity to improve and getting better rather than say, oh, benchmark that decarbonization would mean you will have to degrade it or downgrade it. No, you don't have to be like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have another question that's come in from the online audience, anonymous, and it's probably aimed at you, Virgil. Is the support for heat pumps contained in the heat and building strategy sufficient? And what are your general impressions of the government's net zero strategy?
Okay, I'm not sure if this is government referring to the UK government or the Scottish government.
Yeah.
That's not entirely clear, right? Okay. I would start by confessing, my focus more has been on what the Scottish government have been proposing than the UK government, so I'm probably not best placed to talk about what the UK government are proposing, which of course only applies to England and potentially Wales, not Scotland. The point about, I think we kind of touched on the discussion around heat pumps earlier. I think there's a major affordability issue with heat pumps. Two things need to happen. One is we need to see the cost of technology come down, and I think that will happen. As there's more competition in the market, as with every other technology, we'll see costs reduce. But we also need to make sure that for those who are in need, there is sufficient support. Now, as long as we're doing this over a reasonable timescale, if it's 10 years, if you have a gas boiler, the chances are, at some point in the next 10 years, your gas boiler needs to be replaced. And if it's accepted that when your gas boiler breaks down, you put in a heat pump, then you're not having to scrap something that's perfectly good and working. So you kind of, as a household, for example, you build into your forward plans that at some point you'll need a new boiler. So that helps perhaps ease the pain just a little bit in terms of technology changes. But we have to start that transition now. And one of the things that really depresses me, if you go, you walk out of here and go to a new housing development in Glasgow, all the houses have been built with gas boilers. Mm. You buy a new house now, it's got a gas boiler in it, and it seems extraordinary that we're still allowing this to happen. And that needs to change, because apart from anything else, it is very unfair on the people buying those houses with a lovely new house, a lovely new gas boiler, not realising that probably at some point in the next 10 years, they're going to have to shell out quite a large sum of money to replace that gas boiler. And that is where I think government needs to be much clearer in terms of building standards and say, no, sorry, you can't be building new houses today without some sort of renewable heat.
That's a really good point.
It's a big hill to climb, because our research says that the vast majority of people don't realise that their gas-fired boiler is a source of is adding to global warming. So when you see the plume of smoke coming out of your flue, people don't think that is a greenhouse gas, and so there's a big hill to climb there. And I think unless the product that's being offered, people can see, that it's as revolutionary to my life as this was, for example, then I think that's going to be. It is going to be hard work. So I'm tarnishing my reputation as an optimist.
Well, thank you very much. We're actually just out of time there. Just wanted to say a big thank you to Smart Energy for partnering with us. So, and also thank you very much to all our panelists. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you everyone who's come today out to attend it in person, and thank you very much to our live audience as well. Just final little point here is that you're welcome to sign up to Bright Blue. If you'd like to go to any one of our team members, you can become a member as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.